Hey, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Beyond Day One. If we're honest, Gen Zers show up to the workspace expecting six-figure salaries, remote flexibility, and a seat at the strategy table before they've even proven their value. On the other side, many companies fail to set proper expectations, set clear expectations, or offer fair opportunities to grow. So, tonight, we're going to talk about right sizing expectations, what's fair to expect, and what's earned through time, trust, and consistency. I'm David, and we're so glad that you've joined us to have this conversation. I am not alone tonight. As always, I bring backup, and they're strapped with knowledge, that is. That's Philip on the one side. On the other side is Ryan. And you guys, we've got to talk about this concept of expectations. Um, you know, I want to, I kind of want to approach this conversation from two sides, but the one side that I want to say is if you're a Gen Z, I want you to really kind of just hear us out and hear us out as friends trying to give you some feedback and some advice that will help you long term. But sometimes Gen Zers come in with what I would call more so, I don't know, you guys, I wouldn't call it expectation, but kind of a demand, you know, that they want it a certain way, and that that even comes from a wrong place in the beginning, I think, coming in with a certain expectation about work that is based upon unrealistic beliefs, unrealistic expectations around what work should be like, especially when you're new to the work environment. I do think that when people are trying to help you to understand what it's like, first of all, I don't think there are enough people out there that try to help the Gen Zer understand what it's going to be like to enter the workplace in the first place, which is why we're here and why we exist. But then I don't think that there are enough people that tell the truth about what you should and shouldn't expect. Ryan, what's your thought on that?
Well, yeah, I think that the first thing is, um, the difference between expectation and being entitled. You really have to
Mm,
iron that out, and
that's
that,
good.
I mean, those are strong words, but if you're not careful, you're going to go into the workforce or really anywhere in your life feeling like you're owed something. And if you're going into anywhere, whether it's your workplace or a relationship or driving through traffic, really anywhere, and you feel like you're owed something, man, that ain't gonna get you very far. Nobody who is wealthy go becomes wealthy because they're entitled to it. It's because they worked for it. Yes, they have high expectations for themselves and for everyone around them. Nothing wrong with that. But they never, rich people don't feel entitled to the money. Rich people don't feel entitled to a good culture. Rich people don't feel entitled to a certain break or feel entitled to having coffee bars and high salaries. No, they have high expectations, but they don't feel entitled. So you got to iron those two things out. Then the next thing you have to know is what are your expectations and clearly define them. Take some time privately to define your expectations because one of the best things I ever learned in life was my expectations are here, but someone I'm working with or in a relationship, their expectations are over here. And in this gap in between is where frustration is bred. So if you
Mhm.
want to avoid frustration, you have to close the expectation gap.
Yeah, and you said something there that's important. Writing down what your expectations are, but I would take that even a step further, Phil. I'd take that to somebody that you know and trust who's worked and say, "Here's what I'm expecting. Tell me what's wrong with this list. What's your take?"
Yeah, I think that it's always good to get the feedback from somebody who maybe even from another generation, that type of thing, that can provide a little bit more objectivity, if you want to call it that. I was thinking about the whole Gen Z situation, if you want to call it that, in terms of the type of environment they've grown up in. They're one of the first generations, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that have like been online since birth. Like the whole social media thing has come into play. David, you and I and Ryan, I believe, we were around before social media became a big thing, and so we kind of saw how life was before all that happened. But Gen Z, to a degree, and this is not really their fault, it's just the way the timeline of history has happened. They're born into a time where perspective can be warped by seeing people that have instant success because there's some social media influencer and things like that. And so they can have this idea, possibly a false idea of instant gratification just always going to happen. Things like that can really cloud your judgment in terms of, what to really expect, especially if you're trying to get into the workforce. We have an old saying, there's no free lunch, that type of thing. It's one of those things where, like you said, it's good to have somebody that they can bounce ideas off of, that maybe they trust, or somebody that they confide in to some degree, to let them know, hey, look, I know that you see such and so influencer just skyrocketing into fame and fortune, and I know that things seem easy for people who present themselves a certain way online, but it may not be the reality when you're out here in the workforce. So I think that's valuable, definitely, to get that feedback.
Phil, this is a conversation. I think that you and I had it yesterday, or maybe it was me and Ryan. I don't know. But, it's this concept because, back in my day, I hate to be that old dude. I'm not that boomer though. Back in the day, and I think this may be a little bit true for your generation too, Ryan. But, the concept of getting rich meant that you were probably going to try to be a sports star. You're
Right.
going to try to play football, baseball, basketball, and you were going to be one of the thousands that got one of those positions. And then the reality sets in, and it's like, there are only 1,200 people on all the basketball teams. There are only 1,300 players in the NFL. And there are literally 5 million of you all saying you're going to get one of those 1,300 seats at the NFL table.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not likely. And so back then we were looking at sports or acting, something like that, as a means to get rich. But now this creator economy that exists, kids today, or Gen Z in particular, looks at the concept of being a social media influencer and sees a quick ascent to money and the ability to do what they want to do. But the reality is that even that, just like for being the sports star or whatever, or the actor back in the day, the reality is that being a genuine influencer is a position that the few thousand may get. And to be genuine and to make good money at it and to drive forward, it's not everybody who's doing it, but there are a lot of people who are doing it. So you're still going to be in a position where you may have to deal with the reality of a job. And when you talk about working a job, whether that's working to save up, to start your own business or whatever, you have to have the right expectations. So let's talk about some of the things that Gen Z should expect at work. The one that I want to start with first, you guys, is the concept of, and I know this one gets some of the older generations because they don't always understand it, but it's the concept of respect and psychological safety. And I think in the simplest way, it's nobody deserves to work in some of these toxic work environments that so many of us have had to work in and work through over the years. What's your thought, Phil?
Yeah, it's true. There's there's been a lot of change in terms of workplace standards and ethics that have been kind of become more commonplace. Back in the day, it was far more, and I hate to, this is the first example that came to my mind, but it was far more common for sexual harassment to happen and not ever get reported and that type of thing. Or different things where people's either personal space or trust was violated in some kind of way, and it just wasn't really talked about. It was just kind of a thing that happened, But in more recent years, there's been a lot more attention on those types of things in terms of putting more structure behind the standards that we govern ourselves by in the workplace. And I think it's for good overall, because you don't want things happening to people that they don't feel like they can go to anybody to talk about or process some things that may have happened at work or whatever. So yeah, I'd say I'd say it's a move in the right direction for sure.
Yeah. Another thing I think is fair to expect from any good work environment is fair pay for your work. Now, there's a difference between fair pay for your work and coming in the door thinking, you should make $100,000, but you're scanning groceries. That,
Right.
that's not quite how it works. But you
Yeah.
should be able to even I'll say it like this: an entry level position doesn't mean that you come in underpaid. You shouldn't take $7 an hour to do a job that clearly should pay you $18 an hour. And one of
Right.
the things that I tell you that I always do, or used to do, and still do in looking at jobs and all of those things, I go on to places like Glassdoor sometimes. I'll
Mhm.
go into pay sites to get a sense of what is the scale, what's the range of pay for these positions, because it helps me to go into the interview more prepared and knowing what I should be asking for and what I should be looking for.
Yeah.
Another thing that you should be expecting are opportunities for growth. You should be looking for mentorship, feedback, and the ability to grow forward and move from position to position and just make forward progress. What's your thought on that, Ryan?
Yeah, I think having somebody in your life that you invite to speak in is important. I think it's also important that you don't just invite anybody, that you trust them, that they're going to be honest with you, and it's somebody that you can receive feedback from, so that you can grow forward. You don't just become stagnant or lazy or apathetic. I think it's healthy to do.
I agree, Ryan, completely. And finally, I think the other thing that you should expect is transparency. The communication between you, your boss, even the people you work with should be clear. This is where communication around expectations should be discussed and has, so that you clearly understand what's expected of you, what it's going to take to grow forward, and how things work in your environment. Clear communication about performance standards and your development. Remember, don't ever lose sight of that. In all of this communication, you want to be talking about your development, your growth, and what's going to help you to move forward. So, we've kind of just kicked this conversation off, starting with what we should expect at work. Next week, we're going to look at what you should not expect at work and when it's time to ask for help. We love you guys. We're so glad that you've joined us. Hey, don't forget, we've got a great course out called Beyond Day One. And this course has helped you to be ready for the work environment. You can use the link below to get that course and really transform your trajectory forward. Until next time, I'm David, Philip, Ryan, and we'll see you later.